In May of 2024, while spending a humid weekend in Savannah, Georgia, I ducked into a narrow Bay Street storefront called Halcyon Relics to escape an afternoon thunderburst and walked out carrying a mahogany tabletop phonograph that has since rearranged my sense of time, memory, and mortality. The shop was one of those dim warrens where stained glass lamps cast jaundiced puddles on towers of trunks, and winding through aisles felt like trespassing in someone's attic dream. So when I heard a needle scratch faintly from a back corner, I assumed the owner tested a player for ambience until I realized the only visible machine sat silent beneath a shroud of dust, its crank key missing. Yet music, thin distant swing, still echoed from somewhere deeper behind a chipped green door marked "Employees Only." Rain hammered the tin roof, drowning my curiosity until I noticed a discreet placard, "Silent Auction, 1916 Monarch Deluxe Phonograph, Inquire Within." The price, $90, felt criminally low. A bell above the entrance jingled as a tall, rail-thin woman appeared, grey bobs slick against her cheeks as if perpetually wet. She introduced herself as Mrs. Halcyon and led me to the machine I'd assumed was broken. Up close, the mahogany case bore faint watermarks shaped like fingerprints, the brass horn unusually bright. And when I brushed dust from the turntable, a 78 RPM shellac disc revealed itself already seated, label scoured blank. I asked to hear it. She warned the mainspring was stiff and the record selective, but I could try one revolution. No winding key existed, so she produced a thin brass crank from her apron, fitted it, and with one languid turn, the platter began spinning soundlessly. After half a rotation, a female voice emerged, brittle yet clear, my mother calling my childhood nickname, telling 10-year-old me to come inside before lightning struck the pool. The thunder outside the shop cracked in sync with the memory, and though my mother died 8 years earlier, the voice was undeniably hers, complete with the Florida panhandle lilt she lost after moving north. My throat closed. Mrs. Halcyon gently stopped the platter, and the rain ceased as abruptly as if a studio track faded out. She said the Monarch Deluxe sometimes tests a buyer's suitability by sampling a memory, and that if I wasn't prepared to own it, I should leave it where decades had already abandoned it. I paid cash on the spot, ignoring the chill rolling off the horn. Back at my Airbnb, I spent hours searching the cabinet for hidden circuitry, nothing but century-old gears. Still, when I cranked it 3 turns, a scratchy baritone crooned a lullaby in German, a song my late grandfather sang only once on cassette before Alzheimer's erased his language. The record's blank label reflected lamplight like a pool of oil rippling as the voice faded. Sleep felt impossible, yet exhaustion won near 3 a.m., and I dreamed the phonograph played by itself while I remained paralyzed in bed, forced to listen as distant relatives whispered forgotten secrets through the timber of warped shellac. Morning sun revealed the machine sitting on the floor, fresh condensation beading on its horn. I tried rational experiments. First playing it unwound, silence, then winding without disc, it still spoke. This time replaying yesterday's conversation with Mrs. Halcyon word for word, though I'd recorded nothing nearby. The thought struck that it might be encoding environment sounds onto some internal medium, but the mechanics couldn't allow it. I boxed it carefully, vowed to deliver it to an audio historian back home in Durham, and started the long drive Monday. The Monarch rode seat-belted beside me like a mute passenger. Somewhere near Charleston, the empty horn emitted 3 slow clicks timed with mile markers, then spoke a single phrase in my own voice: "Exit now." My hands turned the wheel before brain consented, guiding me off I-95 onto a frontage road ending at a derelict filling station. Nothing but warped pumps and palmetto shadows greeted me. The phonograph thumped against the seat, lid popping open though I'd latched it. Inside, the turntable spun unattended, the blank record blacker than before, center hole smoldering orange like eclipse corona. A new voice issued, my father's, though he lives, pleading, "Don't let her record the rest." I slammed the lid, the voice cut mid-syllable, and headlights from a rusted pickup flicked on behind the station, though no one sat inside. Terror drove me back onto the highway at illegal speed, yet the machine continued vibrating through cardboard, making the dash clock stutter seconds backward each time it clicked. Arriving home, I hauled the Monarch into my shed, unwilling to share its presence with living space. I rigged a GoPro, pointed a studio mic, then wound exactly one turn. The horn hissed, and a chorus of unfamiliar voices began reciting locations. Spots I'd visited secretly with ex-lovers, parking garages where I'd cried after job interviews, hospital hallways where I'd paced during surgeries, cartography of private shame pouring into the chipped green metal, each confession punctuated by that phrase, "exit now delivered," in whichever voice fit the memory. When the spring unwound fully, the shed hung silent, except for dripping condensation forming around the machine. Reviewing the GoPro footage, I discovered frames missing during each utterance. The timestamp jumped backward by the length of the spoken sentence, as if time rewound locally to make room for the sound. I contacted Mrs. Halcyon, number disconnected, shop Google listing deleted, storefront now a candy boutique according to Street View captured 2 days after my purchase. No public record of Halcyon relics exists before or since. I considered smashing the phonograph, but feared what trapped voices might escape, so I drove at dusk to an abandoned quarry outside Raleigh, intent on sinking it in the deepest pit. Halfway there, the horn began playing road noise samples from that very moment. My engine rev, gravel pinging wheel wells, layered seconds after they happened like a delayed echo. Then it accelerated, predicting sounds a heartbeat before reality. A deer's hooves clattering across asphalt just before it dashed from brush. The screech of my brakes half a second early. It was reading the immediate future in sound, tightening the gap until it predicted my breath before lungs filled. Panicked, I veered onto a fire road, skidded to a stop, grabbed the machine, metal now scalding and ice-cold simultaneously, and hurled it into the flooded pit. It struck with a gong, water closing without splash. Silence. Then a faint waltz began reverberating through the quarry walls, vibrations rippling the surface in concentric rings that pulsed to shore and lapped against my boots, tempo measured in the beat of my racing heart. I fled. Months later, my phone occasionally records phantom voicemails, 30 seconds of surface microphones capturing ambient life, one heartbeat before it occurs, ending always with the directive, "exit now." Sometimes the message arrives before I leave the driveway for work, sometimes while I'm already in motion. I keep driving anyway, windows down, scanning roadside antique shops for a green-doored anomaly selling nothing but memories too stubborn to stay in the past, praying I never again hear the faint scratch of a needle dropping onto blank shellac in the next room of my life. In February of 2024, while killing time before a conference in Portland, Oregon, I ducked into a narrow brick storefront on NW 23rd Avenue called Lamp Black Antiques, partly to escape sleet, and partly because a faded sign in the window promised rare photographic curiosities, 1850 to 1930. Photography is a hobby of mine, so the chance to handle century-old cameras felt like a harmless treat after the phonograph ordeal I'd buried under denial. The proprietor, a compact man with tobacco-stained fingers, glanced up from a newspaper, nodded, and left me to wander cluttered aisles stacked with enamel signs, opera glasses, and rows of brass lenses. Against the back wall stood a glass cabinet secured by a brass hasp. Inside rested a single mahogany box camera the size of a shoebox, lens capped with cracked leather, a tag read Gurney & Son Daguerreotype, 1854, please ask before handling. Something about the grain of its wood looked too fresh, pores breathing like young skin rather than dried walnut. I asked to examine it. The proprietor produced a key, hesitated, and said the camera was technically on hold for a local collector, but I could look if I promised not to remove the lens cap. I agreed and lifted it gingerly. The wood felt cool despite the overheated shop, and when I put my eye to the ground glass focusing screen, a faint silver haze drifted across it, an image forming without light. For half a second I saw the shop interior not as it was but stripped of colour, every object ghost pale, and in the far corner stood a tall woman in Victorian dress, eyes level with mine, expression blank. I jerked away, heart flicking. The screen cleared. I replaced the camera. The proprietor relocked the cabinet, offered no comment, and rang up a tiny brass lens brush I'd grabbed as pretext to break eye contact. As I left, sleet turned to frozen drizzle that hissed on the sidewalk, and behind me the shop lights dimmed in a slow, deliberate fade, as if someone dialed the filaments down by hand. That evening at the hotel, my phone pinged. A new airdrop request from Daguerre, 1854, offering a file named IMG_00000001.dng. I declined, startled. No one else was in the lobby, and my phone's airdrop sat on contacts only. Seconds later, the request returned. Same file, now titled first_light. I cancelled AirDrop entirely, stomach tight, and tried to forget. Yet, overnight, my iCloud downloaded a single black and white photo dated 1854, showing a city street I recognized as modern Portland, but empty of cars, storefronts boarded, sky blank like unexposed film. In the foreground, the same Victorian woman stood holding the mahogany camera, lens cap dangling. I deleted the image, it reappeared at dawn. I returned to lampblack before the conference, determined to confront the owner. The shop was shuttered, closed sign hanging crooked. Through glass I saw overturned furniture and shards of old selenium glass, scattered as though an inside gale had swept through. Police tape fluttered at the side alley. A passerby told me the place had burned just after closing. Odd electrical fault, but investigators found no owner, only blackened newspaper stuck to a wall spelling out "on hold" where the camera had been. No fire damage marked the cabinet, yet the daguerreotype was gone. Back home, the phantom photo bred copies with sequential numbers. IMG_00000002, 3, 4, each captured at later times of day, sun rising, shadow shortening, though the street in them remained deserted, except for the woman inching closer to the camera frame. By image 6, she stood outside my apartment building. Metadata claimed a shutter speed of 0.0 seconds, aperture null. I reset every password, disabled syncing, even smashed and replaced the phone. Within hours, the new device received the same images, now overlaid with coordinates matching my GPS. I contacted a photography historian who traced Gurney and Son sales records. Only one 1854 model had been shipped to the West Coast, intended for a traveling mortuary photographer who documented graveside mourners. Legend said the camera's silvered plates were bathed in mercury reclaimed from a failed gold mine, contaminating them with trace arsenic that etched ghostly halos around subjects. No proof, just lore. Still, I flew back to Portland, intent on destroying or quarantining the relic. City inspectors let me walk the charred remains. Beneath a collapsed beam, I found the brass lens cap, cold, untouched by fire, and leather loop intact. It vibrated faintly in my palm like a clockwork heart. On impulse, I snapped it onto a spare DSLR lens in my bag. The vibrations ceased, but the LCD froze, then flashed a preview. A live feed in monochrome showing me kneeling in ruins with a blurred silhouette behind, hand reaching. I tore the cap off. The feed vanished. Outside, commuters passed, unaware, yet every reflective surface, shop windows, bus windshields, held momentary flashes of the Victorian woman advancing, camera cradled. I drove to Cape Meares, where basalt cliffs dropped straight to pounding surf, and at sunset I stood near the edge, lens cap in one hand, phone in the other, cycling through 200 photos, now documenting each mile of my drive from an impossible third-person vantage. The final photo updated live, framing my back as I faced the sea, woman at my shoulder, her free hand opening the mahogany box toward grey horizon. I hurled the cap as far as strength allowed. It sailed in a perfect arc, but before it hit water, the photo on my screen froze. Cap mid-flight, woman's eyes finally meeting mine through glass. Phone shut down, battery hot. I tossed it too and drove inland without stopping until sunrise. Weeks later, co-workers mentioned finding old tintype portraits in office drawers, images of empty desks except for a single brass lens cap centered like a coin on velvet. They assume it's my vintage obsession playing tricks. I laugh weakly, but each new tintype edges closer to my cubicle, exposure sharper. I encourage night cleaners to leave any antiques alone, yet the photographs keep propagating, crawling nearer to the seat where I typed these words. Somewhere a wooden camera with mercury lungs is still open, still recording, and eventually it will stand close enough to capture my face in the perfect death-still clarity of first light, whether or not the lens cap lies at the bottom of an Oregon sea. In July of 2023, while detouring through Lancaster, Pennsylvania on my way to visit family in Philadelphia, I ducked into a barn-turned antique market called Red Willow Exchanges to wait out a thunderstorm and ended up purchasing a mantel clock that has since made every hour of my life feel borrowed. The market sprawled across two creaking floors, stalls separated by quilts tacked to rafters, rain drumming tin like hooves overhead. Near the back, lit only by a single Edison bulb, stood a walnut Seth Thomas shelf clock, enameled dial, brass pendulum still gleaming. The price tag, $18.73, scrawled in fountain pen ink so fresh it bled onto my thumb. I wound the key once. The movement ticked with a deep, reassuring heartbeat. What sold me was its chime. Instead of the usual Westminster, it emitted a single low tone that felt more spoken than struck. The vendor, a heavy-eyed man in railroad overalls, said it had been consigned anonymously that morning. I paid cash, stowed it on the passenger seat, and merged onto Route 30 as thunderheads folded into lilac dusk. 30 miles east, the clock began ticking faster, beating double time though the hands crawled. My phone lost service. Every station faded to static. At 7:04 p.m. the clock chimed, one tone impossibly loud. The digital dash clock froze, then jumped ahead to 7:13 p.m. My headlights flickered, but traffic behind never closed the gap. I wrote it off as power inverter interference and reached my parents by 9, hiding the clock in the attic to avoid my father's lecture about filling the house with dusty nonsense. That night I lay awake in my childhood room, sheets damp from humidity and faint ticking seeped through walls, though 2 floors separated me from the attic. At 12:59 a.m. the house shuddered with a resonance that wasn't thunder. The grandfather clock in the hallway mutely agreed. Its hands stalled at midnight, but the attic visitor struck one deep note unlike any chime I'd heard. My phone lit, 1:13 a.m., another strike, 2:13 a.m. on the screen. Each toll advance time 13 minutes, all devices in sync. Panic clenched. I crept upstairs, flashlight trembling across drywall. The attic door exhaled a draft of air colder than cellars ever find in July. Inside, moonlight pooled through a cracked pane, illuminating the mantel clock perched on a trunk. Its minute hand twitched anti-clockwise, fighting itself, then snapped forward 13 minutes and chimed again. Dust motes swirled, forming vague silhouettes of gears hanging mid-air before evaporating. I reached to stop the pendulum. Frost bloomed across the walnut case under my fingertips, burning cold that blistered skin. The brass key, still in my pocket, vibrated like a stung tuning fork. I slammed the attic door, shoving a dresser across it. From behind wood came the relentless ticking, accelerating. Every 13 minutes, the house groaned with another impossible chime, and the night shortened. At 3:39 a.m., my mother knocked, confused why the oven clock claimed it was almost dawn. She smelled something burning. Together, we followed acrid smoke to the basement where the fuse box glowed cherry red around the main breaker. I killed power, plunging rooms into silence, no refrigerator hum, no attic ticks. Outside, birds began their pre-dawn chorus, although the sky remained star-black. Daylight eventually crawled up after we'd already lived its first hour. My father blamed faulty wiring. I blamed my impulse purchase. I wrapped the clock in a drop cloth, loaded it into the trunk, and drove to a regional watch and clock repair shop outside King of Prussia. The horologist, a woman with jeweler goggles, examined the movement, then froze. The escapement, she said, was missing its pallet fork. Without it, a clock cannot tick. Yet we both heard ticking loud enough to rattle crystal. She extracted the dial and found an inscription inside the case. E. Cogburn, July 13, 1873. Time belongs to the debtor. Searching records, she found Edward Cogburn was a bankrupt railroad contractor who reportedly leapt beneath a locomotive the minute creditors arrived, scheduled at 1:13 p.m. While we spoke, the shop's digital wall clock sprinted ahead, digits smearing into glitch before stopping at 1:13 p.m. My pocket burned. The brass key had etched numbers into my palm, 13, 13, 13, as if acid bit. The mantel clock chimed once, though uncoupled from its gong. The horologist tried to leave the room. The door refused to budge, hinges shrieking in time with a new ticking under the floorboards. Shadows elongated across the counter to noon length, although light came from fluorescent tubes. She shouted to smash the movement. I swung a steel mallet down. Wood splintered, but no gears lay inside, only a paper-thin cavity where machinery should be. From that hollow issued the faint whistle of an approaching train. Desperation flung the clock into the repair shop's kiln used for solder work. Flames roared, glass cracked, but through the viewing pane, hands spun backward, stopping at 12:59. The kiln's thermostat plummeted to 32 degrees, frost spiderwebbing across steel. The whistle grew into a subterranean roar, shelves shaking, minute hands on every customer repair rotating together to 1:13. Something massive rumbled below us, rail ties splitting perhaps, followed by a crash so heavy my ears popped. The power failed. In total dark, the mantel clock struck 13 successive tones, each louder, final note fading like steam under pressure. When emergency lights resumed, the kiln was empty. ashless, and the brass key lay melted to slag, shaped roughly like a rail spike. Phone GPS placed us 13 miles west of our actual location, time code blank. When we stumbled outside, sun exactly overhead, yet phones read 7:13 a.m., 13 hours lost. A freight line ran behind the building, tracks mangled, twisted into Mobius loops for 100 yards as if metal remembered softer days of forging. The shop never reopened. Insurance cited ground heave. My parents' ovens and wall clocks behave, but twice a month, always on the 13th. Their house experiences a silent tremor at 1:13. Pictures tilt, pendants swing, then settle. At work, Outlook reminders occasionally schedule meetings for 1:13 a.m. with subject lines drawn from my childhood notebook entries, never typed into a computer. I delete them, they return. I've grown wary of antique markets, yet I still catch myself counting minutes in sets of 13, fearing if I miscount the next chime may place me on a track with debt collectors who honor only one currency. The hours a fool tried to own by winding a clock that never needed gears to keep its promise. Every forgotten relic carries a memory, and some collect new ones at your expense. If these antique shop horrors made you glance twice at dusty shelves like share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon, because the next object that whispers your name might already know your history.